When I entered the bathroom, a glint on the carpet caught my eye, a reflection of sunlight slipping through the blinds. Curious, I glanced down cautiously, barefoot and wary of stepping on something sharp. Caroline hadn't mentioned dropping anything here, but you never know. On closer inspection, I saw a small foil circle, nearly camouflaged against the carpet's color until the light revealed it. Stooping, I picked it up. It was the backing from a pill strip, the kind that's typically left behind when a pill is pushed out. Turning it over, I noticed markings on one side, TUE. It seemed to mean Tuesday, though today was Wednesday, so it must have been yesterday's pill. I don't take any medications myself. At 35, I'm perfectly healthy, as is my wife, Caroline. We both recently passed our annual physicals with flying colors. So, why was there a pill backing in our bathroom? Several daily pills came to mind, but one stood out, the birth control pill. I'd had a vasectomy 2 years ago after the birth of our second child, so I assumed Caroline wasn't on the pill anymore. She's never had issues with her periods or cramps. Lucky her. So there didn't seem to be another reason. The sight of that foil backing stirred unsettling thoughts. Was it possible she was taking them for an illness she hadn't mentioned? But no, our recent health exams ruled that out. That left one other possibility, one that twisted my gut. If she was on the pill again, and I'd had a vasectomy, she could only be taking it to prevent pregnancy from someone else. Caroline might be cheating on me. We'd been together for 9 years, married for 8. I met her at a bar shortly after graduating college, during my first steps into a career in engineering. She was an assistant then, and though our connection wasn't immediate, I was drawn to her striking presence. Caroline, almost as tall as my 5 feet 11 inches, had been a former athlete, with a slender frame and an undeniably captivating figure. We dated for about a year before marrying when I was 26. Together, we built a life and had 2 beautiful children, now 5 and 2 years old. After the second child, I had a vasectomy to ensure our family wouldn't grow larger. Life seemed ideal, until now. I tucked the pill backing back where I found it, determined not to act rashly. Confronting Caroline without more information wouldn't achieve anything. I needed answers. Was there someone else? How long had this been going on? And the hardest question of all, were our children even mine? The possibilities churned in my head, but I resolved to gather evidence first. I ordered DNA testing kits to discreetly confirm the children's paternity and bought surveillance equipment, including tiny cameras and voice recorders. A cloning kit for Caroline's phone was part of the plan. If she was cheating, I'd know soon enough. By Friday, all the packages had arrived. I left work early to prepare. With the nanny busy feeding the kids dinner, I set up cameras discreetly. One in the bathroom, another in the living room, and the last in the bedroom, aimed at the bed. Later that night, after helping with the kids' bedtime routines, I collected DNA samples from them and myself and mailed them for testing. Caroline came home on schedule that evening. While she showered, I took the opportunity to install voice recorders in her car and bag and clone her phone. But my first sweep revealed nothing. No suspicious messages, emails, or calls. Either she wasn't cheating, or she was being exceptionally cautious. The weekend passed uneventfully. Our routines continued as usual, with our typical closeness in the mornings before the kids woke up. Yet the pill strip confirmed she'd taken them. The missing days matched perfectly. By Monday, I had one thought. The answers I needed were coming, and the truth couldn't stay hidden for long. When Caroline left for work, I stayed home, determined to review the footage from the cameras. The bathroom feed confirmed what I already knew. She was taking the pills. But the footage from our bedroom revealed something shocking. On Saturday evening, while I cooked dinner, Caroline had showered in our room and sent a text from a second phone, not the one in her bag. She then hid it inside the ventilation duct. Later, I checked the vent, but the phone wasn't there, meaning she must have taken it when she left. This was the first concrete evidence of suspicious behavior, and I needed access to that phone. Reviewing the morning's footage, I saw her retrieve it from the vent and place it in her bag before heading to work. That evening, after she returned and showered, her bag was phone-free again. Quietly, I retrieved it from the vent in our daughter Sonia's room, cloned it, and returned it. As I was placing it back, Caroline emerged from the bathroom, nearly catching me. I sat by Sonia's bed, stroking her hair, hoping to seem casual. "Did something happen?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Sometimes I like to sit with one of them," I whispered, trying to sound wistful, just to remind myself how lucky I am to have such wonderful children. She smiled faintly. "You're a sentimental old man," she teased. "Let's go before you wake her." The next day, I opened the cloned phone, and my world shattered. The text between Caroline and an unnamed person laid everything bare. They detailed secret meetings and physical encounters, filled with intimate knowledge that excluded me entirely. It was as if I didn't exist in her private world. Tears streamed down my face as I sat in my office, oblivious to the buzzing intercom. Eventually, my secretary, Michelle, knocked lightly and entered. Always professional, Michelle carried an air of efficiency with her slim frame, red hair, and green eyes. She noticed my distress immediately. "Tell me," she urged gently, handing me a napkin. Wordlessly, I showed her the phone. She scanned the messages and then looked at me with quiet sympathy. "Do you know who it is?" she asked. I shook my head. "How did you find out?" The words flowed out of me as I recounted the pill foil in the bathroom and everything that followed. Michelle sat silently, holding my hand, a first for us. "You need more information," she said firmly. "The DNA results will be here by Wednesday. Can you wait until then?" "I don't know," I admitted. She nodded thoughtfully. "Our team in Portland needs you urgently," she said, booking a flight without asking. "You'll return Thursday." "I can't focus on work right now," I muttered. "Then let me tell Caroline," she insisted, typing a quick message on my phone. Caroline responded quickly, saying she understood and loved me. After handing back my phone, Michelle made another call. "Lorraine," she said. "Yes, thank you. When are you free this afternoon?" "Great. See you then." She turned back to me. "You have an appointment with my friend?" I followed her like a robot, too dazed to protest. Lorraine, Michelle's best friend and a divorce lawyer, welcomed us. Michelle explained my situation while I sat in a haze, struggling to grasp that this was my life now. Lorraine wasted no time laying out options. "Do nothing," she began. "Stay ignorant for a peaceful life. Or, go for an amicable divorce. Split everything, pay child support, and move on. Or," she paused, a glint in her eye, "go nuclear. Sue for infidelity, contest paternity, and take them both down." "I choose nuclear," I said without hesitation. Lorraine grinned. "Then let's get to work. But we need more evidence. Texts, meetings, names. Can I keep the phone?" I nodded, handing it over. Michelle booked me a room at a small family-run hotel. "Go shower and order room service," she instructed. "I'll bring you what you need later." I moved mechanically, the weight of betrayal crushing me. Alone in the hotel room, I thought about everything. Caroline's job, her boss, the time spent away from home. Was her independence just an excuse to be near her lover? I eyed the minibar, tempted, until Michelle arrived. "Don't even think about it," she warned. "You need a clear head." "A plan?" I asked bitterly. I had a plan. A wife, kids, a life. Now I have nothing. She crossed her arms. "Pity party's over. Remember when we started the company? Plans fell apart then, too. What did we do?" Her words struck a chord, and my mind began to turn. It wasn't over, not yet. I stared at Michelle, her words settling over me like a challenge. She wasn't wrong. None of my partners could run the company like I could. If Caroline took half and sold her share, it would leave us vulnerable. The thought of everything I'd built falling into the hands of my biggest competitor, Headingley, ignited a fire inside me. I couldn't let my efforts, or the livelihoods of 141 employees and their families, crumble because of her betrayal. "You're right," I admitted, a sense of purpose replacing my despair. "I need to protect the company and secure my kids' futures, whether they're biologically mine or not." Michelle nodded, her face showing approval. "That's the Gary I need to see. Someone who plans ahead, who doesn't let setbacks define him." We spent the evening strategizing. Selling my shares outright was too risky. My partners could mismanage the company or sell it to a competitor. Instead, we devised a plan to establish an offshore trust. I would sell the company at market value to the trust, keeping myself as CEO on a nominal salary. This move would make me a paper millionaire while shielding assets from local jurisdiction. The trust would act as a safeguard, protecting the company and ensuring I retain control. Next, we discussed liquidating my 401k and tapping into the equity in my home. The house, which I had bought before Caroline and I married, was solely in my name. Its value would need careful handling. We can consolidate the finances, I said, hesitating. But won't the court see records of these assets? Couldn't Caroline still claim a share? Michelle grinned. Only if the money still exists when the court looks for it. That's where Vegas comes in. Her plan was bold. Liquidate everything, appear deeply in debt, and show minimal income to the court. If the children turned out to be mine, she suggested placing my 401k into a trust for their education. This would make it untouchable by Caroline. Depending on the outcome, she might even owe you alimony, Michelle added with a smirk. As we discussed the details, the weight of the DNA test hung over me. The results were supposed to arrive that day. Picking up my phone, I saw the email notification but hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready to face the truth. Want me to check? Michelle offered. I handed her the phone, unable to bring myself to open it. She scanned the email, her face carefully neutral. The results aren't in yet, she said finally. They should be available in the next 12 hours. Let's focus on the bank for now. The bank visits were efficient. We released equity from the house, cashed out my 401k, and closed all savings accounts, transferring the funds into a new account in my name. I left the joint account untouched, containing less than $10,000. Caroline wouldn't suspect anything yet. Later that day, we briefed my lawyer, Brian Spencer, on the plan. He listened carefully before raising an important point. You have a marriage contract, he reminded me. A prenup? I asked, surprised. I hadn't realized it was part of the original partnership agreement when we started the company. Brian nodded. It's to protect the company in the event of a split. It only covers company assets, not personal ones. Caroline can only claim your salary and 401k. Here's my suggestion. He outlined a plan to use the equity from the house to buy out one of my partners. Robert, the most financially driven of the group, seemed eager to cash out. If needed, we could borrow from the company's pension fund to cover the difference. Payments would come from my newly reduced salary, minimizing assessed assets. The arrangement would shield the company while leaving Caroline with little to claim. You may face foreclosure and lose half the remaining bank funds, Brian said. But beyond that, she won't get much. We could even adjust your salary so hers appears higher, potentially making her liable for child support. Michelle and I exchanged a glance. It was an aggressive plan, but it aligned perfectly with the nuclear option. I nodded at Brian. Let's do it. With a concrete plan in place, I finally felt a sliver of control returning. The coming days would test my resolve, but I was ready to fight. For the company, for my children, and for my dignity. As we left the lawyer's office, I was overwhelmed. Everything was spiraling, and the legal complexities only made it worse. Sitting at the diner with Michelle, I dared to check my phone again. The email containing the DNA test results had been gnawing at me all day. With trembling hands, I clicked the link and passed the phone to Michelle, unable to read it myself. Her face fell, and she handed the phone back to me with a soft, "I'm so sorry, Gary." I read the results slowly, each word striking like a hammer. Neither child was biologically mine. Both shared the same father. The shock was indescribable. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, disbelief, and heartbreak. She hadn't just deceived me about their paternity. She'd also convinced me to have a vasectomy, ensuring I wouldn't have biological children in the future. It was a gut punch that left me breathless. Rage boiled beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. Thoughts of revenge flashed in my mind, wild and unrestrained. I wanted to confront Caroline, to demand answers, but Michelle snapped me back to reality. "Gary, now's not the time. Stay calm. We'll get through this." Her words anchored me, and I focused on taking deep breaths, though my fists clenched under the table. "I need to do something," I muttered, barely able to contain the storm inside. "We will," Michelle assured me. "Let's head to Lorraine's office." At Lorraine's, she greeted us with a serious expression. I've received a preliminary report from the private investigator, she began. Caroline had a visitor last night, a man who stayed over. We believe it's the same man involved in your children's paternity. I have cameras at home, I said, my voice hollow. I can swap the flash drives and review the footage. Good idea, Lorraine nodded. Let's do it now. This footage could be critical. I hesitated. The au pair is with Sophie and James at the play center. I'm supposed to be away on business. If I show up, it might raise suspicion. Lorraine checked her phone. The au pair is still occupied. You've got time. We drove to my house, every second feeling like an eternity. Once there, I quickly swapped the flash drives, scanned the house for anything unusual, and left before anyone could see me. Back at Lorraine's office, we reviewed the footage. I avoided watching the bedroom scenes. I couldn't stomach it. The footage confirmed my fears. Her boss, Bill Wright, entered the house using his own key. When James greeted him as Papa Bill, I broke down. The betrayal hit me harder than I ever thought possible. Michelle hugged me as I cried, her unexpected kindness keeping me grounded. After a while, I wiped my face and sat up. What's our next move? I asked, my voice raw but determined. Lorraine leaned forward. I've obtained your wife's employment terms, she said. There's an anti-fraternization clause in her contract. This gives us grounds to sue her company for non-compliance, especially since her lover is a senior manager. Additionally, we can pursue emotional distress damages against him, misrepresentation on the children's birth certificates against her, and child-related expenses against both. Michelle nodded. And your company lawyer's advice is solid. If Robert agrees to sell his share, you can invest everything in the company. It will shield your assets and strengthen your position. Then it all hinges on Robert, I said, my mind already racing through possibilities. We'll wait for his decision. As Michelle drove me back to the hotel, the weight of everything settled in. Just as I reached my room, there was a knock at the door. Michelle stood there, her expression firm. Let's go, she said. Why? I asked, confused and exhausted. Because if you stay here alone, you'll brood or hit the minibar, she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. Her words struck a chord, and for the first time that day, I managed a small, bitter smile. Lead the way, I said, grabbing my jacket. After Michelle picked me up and insisted I stay at her place, I reluctantly agreed. I followed her home, finding myself surprised by the size and elegance of her single-story house. It was nearly as large as my own, but more modern in design. She led me to a guest room with its own bathroom, handed me a towel, and said, "Take a shower and change. Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes." Dinner was a quiet affair. The food was delicious, but I could barely taste it. My mind was consumed with anger, betrayal, and the whirlwind of plans I had set in motion. I moved mechanically, as if on autopilot, focusing on each task ahead to keep myself from drowning in emotions. Just as I began to wonder what to do next, Michelle's phone rang. "Hello," she answered briskly, her tone professional. She listened intently before handing me the phone. "It's Robert." I took it hesitantly. "Robert." "Gary," he said simply, his voice even. "I heard." "All this time," I confirmed, keeping my tone flat. "And the kids?" he asked, the weight of his question hanging heavy. "Not mine," I admitted. There was a pause before he spoke again. "So, you want to secure your assets by tying them to the company? Use the prenup?" "Yes," I replied. "I'll keep 5% and continue as a consulting engineer," he offered. "I'll handle HR. The rest is yours." "Okay," I said, relieved. "Brian will prepare the paperwork." There was a brief silence before Robert added, "Gary, I'm really sorry. It might not feel like it now, but it gets easier. Trust me." I realized he spoke from experience. Robert had gone through a bitter divorce years ago, though he never shared the details. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a small glimmer of hope amid the chaos. The next morning, Michelle woke me with a cup of coffee. "Let's go," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We visited Brian Spencer, the company lawyer, and finalized the paperwork for the buyout. The transaction was swift but emotionally draining. By the end of it, I had liquidated my savings, 401k, and home equity and taken out a substantial loan against the company pension plan. On paper, I was nearly $1 million in debt, and my salary was slashed to the bare minimum. It was a calculated move, one that protected the company and ensured Caroline would gain nothing substantial in the divorce. Next, we visited Lorraine, who reviewed the documents and was visibly pleased. "This is perfect," she said. "I'll draft the divorce papers today and file them on Monday." "Where will she be served?" I asked, bitterness seeping into my voice. "Her office," Lorraine replied without hesitation. "Monday morning at 10. It'll be public and humiliating, but effective." I nodded. "Good." Michelle smiled as we left Lorraine's office. "We have one more stop," she said. "You'll like this one." I raised an eyebrow, but didn't press for details. To my surprise, we arrived at the medical center where I'd had my vasectomy. "Why are we here?" I asked. "You'll see," Michelle said, ushering me inside. Dr. Harrington greeted us warmly and wasted no time getting to the point. "Gary, I understand you're inquiring about a vasectomy reversal?" I blinked in surprise. "That's possible?" "Absolutely," he said, "with a success rate of about 95%, even after 3 years. It's a longer procedure under general anesthesia, but you could father children again." Tears welled in my eyes. After everything, this sliver of hope meant the world to me. Michelle placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Good news?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak, and impulsively hugged her. "Thank you," I whispered, pulling back quickly. "Sorry." "It's okay, Gary," she said, her voice kind. Our final stop was at Bill Wright's house. His wife, Stephanie, welcomed us inside. I could tell from her expression that she knew something was wrong. We sat in his office, and I struggled to find the words. "Did you know?" I finally asked. Stephanie sighed. "I suspected, but I never had proof." "I have evidence," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "None of my children are mine." Stephanie's face fell, and she expressed her sympathy. She admitted that she'd had suspicions about Bill and Caroline for years, but had never been able to confirm them. "If I had, I would have taken him for everything he had," she said bitterly. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I hesitated. "The real question is, what will you do?" Stephanie's eyes hardened. "I'll make him pay," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, I felt a sense of solidarity. Both of us had been betrayed by the same person, and now we were ready to fight back. "Gary," Lorraine's voice came through clearly over the call, steady and professional. "Everything is in place. At exactly 10 a.m., Caroline will be served at her office. Simultaneously, the media packages will be delivered to the appropriate parties. Are you ready for this?" I took a deep breath, glancing at Michelle, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Yes," I replied, my voice firm. "Let's do it." Lorraine continued. "This will be public and undoubtedly embarrassing for her. The evidence we've compiled is irrefutable. It includes the DNA results, the footage, and the private investigator's report. You're prepared for the fallout?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, though my stomach churned at the thought of the upcoming confrontation. Michelle added, "Gary's done everything right to protect himself. It's time for Caroline to face the consequences of her actions." At exactly 10 a.m., I refreshed my email and saw a notification from the courier service confirming the deliveries. Within moments, my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Caroline's family and friends were reacting to the revelations. Messages flooded in, some expressing shock, others disbelief. A few were even supportive, expressing anger at Caroline and sympathy for me. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I had wanted justice, but the reality of exposing Caroline and tearing apart what was left of our shared life was bittersweet. These were people I had considered family, people who had celebrated our milestones and shared our struggles. At 10:15, my phone rang. It was Caroline. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Michelle raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Your call." I hesitated, then picked up. "Gary," she started, her voice shaky. "What is this? What are you doing?" "Exposing the truth, Caroline," I said, my tone cold. "The lies, the betrayal. You didn't think I'd find out? This is private. How could you humiliate me like this? She snapped, her tone shifting to anger. You didn't think about privacy when you brought another man into our home, into our bed, I retorted. You didn't think about the consequences when you had 2 children with him and let me believe they were mine. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing heavily, struggling for words. Gary, I don't want your excuses, Caroline, I interrupted. You've made your choices. Now you'll deal with the consequences. I hung up, my hands shaking. Michelle placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. You handled that well, she said softly. By noon, the fallout had escalated. Lorraine called to update me. Caroline's employer has suspended Bill pending an investigation into his violation of the anti-fraternization policy. Caroline will likely face disciplinary action as well. Good, I said, though the news felt hollow. The damage to my life was already done. That afternoon, I received a message from Caroline's mother. It was a heartfelt apology, expressing her disappointment in Caroline and her support for me. You were a wonderful husband and father, she wrote. You didn't deserve this. We're here for you. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. Not everyone had turned against me. By evening, I sat with Michelle at her kitchen table, going over the day's events. You've taken the first steps toward reclaiming your life, she said. It's not going to be easy, but you're moving forward. I don't know what moving forward looks like, I admitted. I don't even know who I am without them. Michelle gave me a thoughtful look. You're Gary, smart, determined, and resilient. You've survived this far, and you'll keep going. You've got people who care about you. Lean on them. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could face it. This is your last chance to back out, Lorraine said, her voice firm but understanding. I'm not saying you should, just that if you've had a change of heart over the weekend, now's the time to speak up. No, I replied resolutely. I'm going through with it. All right, she confirmed. I'll see you on the other side. I kept an eye on my email, waiting for confirmation of service. At precisely 10 a.m., the first email arrived, followed by a second 3 minutes later and a third shortly after. Then my phone rang. Expecting it to be Caroline, I was surprised to see my mother's name on the screen. Gary, she said as I picked up. Her tone was a mix of confusion and worry. What's going on? Did you read the package I sent you? I asked. Yes, she replied hesitantly. Then you know as much as I do, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Caroline's been cheating on me for our entire marriage. The kids aren't mine. I'm divorcing her. Gary, you can't. Mom, I have to work. I can't talk right now. I interrupted and ended the call before she could say more. Almost immediately, the phone rang again. This time, it was Caroline. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I stayed silent. I'm coming home, she added before hanging up. Caroline's on her way, I informed Michelle. I'll step out, she offered, sensing the intensity of the situation. I wanted to ask her to stay, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded silently. Call me when you know what's happening, she said before leaving. 20 minutes later, I heard Caroline's car pull up. She didn't enter through the garage, signaling her urgency. My pulse quickened as she walked in and sat across from me in my office. Gary, not interested. I cut her off. Actually uninteresting, I corrected sharply. I don't want to hear a single word from you. Her eyes widened as I continued. You lied to me for 9 years. Neither child is mine. You convinced me to get a vasectomy while you stayed on birth control so you could continue sleeping with Bill. Her face paled, but she said nothing. I don't care about your excuses or justifications. If you have something you think I need to know, talk to my lawyer. Her card was included in the package you received. What about the children? She asked weakly. What children? I retorted coldly. I don't have children, and thanks to you, I never will. I called the au pair into the room. You're fired, I said bluntly. What? Why? She exclaimed. Because you covered for her, I said, pointing at Caroline. You knew about her affair, and I have video evidence of you discussing her children with Bill. Get out. The au pair turned to Caroline, who stepped in defensively. You can't fire her. I pay her salary. Fine, I replied. But I've already informed the agency about her involvement in an extramarital affair. If you want to keep her, you'll handle her salary, taxes, benefits, and insurance. The au pair paled visibly, realizing her predicament. She hurriedly packed her things and left without another word. Did you have to do that? Caroline asked, anger flashing in her eyes. You're still talking, I said. I told you, I don't want to hear it. Pack your things, take your kids, and leave. This is my home too, she insisted. No, I said, my voice rising. It's my house, registered solely in my name. Until the court says otherwise, you have no claim to it. James entered the room, his small voice breaking the tension. Mommy? Caroline hesitated, then scooped up Sonia and turned to leave. Are you going to say goodbye to them? She asked, tears streaming down her face. Not like this, I replied. They're not my children. Take them to Papa Bill. Let him take care of his kids. With a final look of heartbreak, Caroline walked out. I heard the front door close and her car start. She was gone. The weight of it all hit me at once. I sank into my chair, gasping for air as if I'd been holding my breath forever. Suddenly, arms wrapped around me. I jumped, startled, but when I looked up, it was Michelle. Without a word, she pulled me close and I broke down, sobbing into her embrace. After some time, I composed myself. What now? I asked, my voice hoarse. Now we plan for what's next, Michelle said firmly. Lorraine mentioned Caroline might get an emergency court order to occupy the house. Do you really want her throwing you out of your own home? Her words reignited a spark within me. I wasn't done fighting, not yet. We quickly packed some clothes and important documents, unsure of where I'd stay, but with a sense of urgency driving us forward. Michelle and I loaded my belongings into both of our cars. First, we stopped by the office where I had been served earlier that day. By evening, Lorraine called with updates on the proceedings. There's been a development, Lorraine began. Caroline has been granted temporary occupancy of the house, along with a restraining order preventing you from coming within 100 meters of the property. My chest tightened as she continued. If you need to retrieve anything, it will have to be coordinated through Caroline's attorney and at your own expense. I couldn't comprehend how things had spiraled so quickly. By nightfall, I found myself in Michelle's spare room, my clothes neatly hung in her closet, and my important documents organized in her office cabinets. Despite the chaos, Michelle remained calm and professional, her presence a steadying force. Days blurred into a rhythm. Work during the day, meals and rest at Michelle's house in the evenings. Every morning, she greeted me with coffee, prepared breakfast, and ensured we commuted together. Though she maintained a professional demeanor, there was an unspoken understanding between us. The only break in her composure came on my first night, offering me a comforting hug as I struggled to process everything. Smiles were rare, and light-hearted moments seemed like a distant memory. On Monday morning, we met with the lawyers representing Caroline and Bill's employer. The specifics of the negotiations were largely handled by Lorraine. She outlined a claim for damages that far exceeded the company's insurance coverage. Despite their cool professionalism, their lawyers couldn't hide their discomfort. Lorraine laid out our demands: the immediate and permanent dismissal of Bill Wright, the forfeiture of his pension benefits, and a $1.5 million payout to Caroline as a condition for keeping her employed for 3 more years. By the time they reached an agreement, my settlement was finalized at $750,000, enough to cover the company pension loan and leave a modest reserve for life after the divorce. Lorraine's precision and tenacity carried us through. Later that day, we met with Bill Wright's legal team. After presenting irrefutable evidence of his misconduct and liability, I walked out $500,000 richer. The financial burden weighing me down began to lift slightly, though the emotional toll remained heavy. The final meeting that day was with Caroline's lawyers. I entered the room to find her seated with her legal team, avoiding my gaze. Lorraine and Michelle flanked me, their presence grounding me. The financial demands in this divorce petition are preposterous, Caroline's lawyer began, his tone accusatory. Your client is the CEO and majority shareholder of a company valued at over $20 million. He has substantial assets. Allow me to stop you right there, Lorraine interrupted, sliding a stack of documents across the table. According to the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties, the company is not subject to division and divorce. Additionally, my client recently made significant investments in another venture, depleting his savings, 401k, and home equity. He also took a loan against the company pension fund, leaving him with a reduced salary. Caroline's lawyer flinched but didn't back down. What about the children? He asked. Lorraine leaned forward, her tone cold. DNA evidence confirms that the children are not biologically my clients. Furthermore, the birth certificates were falsified to name my client as their father. We're pursuing damages for fraudulent paternity claims and the coerced surgical sterilization my client underwent under false pretenses. The lawyer paled as Lorraine concluded. Your client can accept these terms, vacate the marital home, forfeit any additional claims, and receive half of the joint account, currently valued at $9,443.15. The room went silent. Caroline finally looked at me, her voice trembling. Gary, please. I didn't let her finish. 9 years, I said, my voice hollow with restrained anger. Day after day, you lied to me. There's nothing you can say now that I want to hear. Caroline glanced at her lawyer, her expression resigned. With a silent nod, she signed the papers. I wasn't present when she left the house, our house. Instead, I received a formal letter from her lawyer confirming the lifting of the restraining order and transferring ownership of the house back to me. The decision to return felt like a hollow victory. Memories of betrayal lingered in every corner, so I listed it for sale. While the proceeds didn't fully cover my debts, it was enough to bridge the gap, leaving the bank satisfied. 2 months passed, and I was still living in Michelle's spare room. Caroline moved back in with her parents, who, despite the evidence, continued to support her unconditionally. They refused to speak to me, but I didn't see it as a loss. Meanwhile, Stephanie, despite her initial resolve, hadn't gone through with divorcing Bill. I chose not to pry. His downfall was public enough. Losing his job, his pension, and his reputation forced them to sell their home in the gated community and relocate to a modest apartment. Bill's connections helped him land a lower-paying job, but it was a far cry from his former life. One day at work, Michelle knocked on my office door and walked in without waiting for a response. Her expression was unreadable, but her words hit me like a storm. Bill Wright is dead. I blinked, processing her blunt announcement. What? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. How? Stephanie caught him with Caroline again, she explained, her tone calm but edged with irony. She shot him. For a moment, I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Then, despite myself, a grin spread across my face. I tried to suppress it, but it was no use. Well, I said finally, that couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Michelle chuckled. You're not even trying to hide it, are you? Should I be? I asked, still smiling. Are you mad at me for feeling good about this? Not at all, she replied, her voice firm. That idiot got what he deserved. She reached into her bag and placed an official envelope on my desk. By the way, this just arrived. I knew what it was before I opened it. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal and read the contents. A quiet weight lifted from my chest. That's it, I said softly. I'm finally a free man. Finally, Michelle echoed, her voice steady. Then, without warning, she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a fleeting peck. It was passionate, a kiss that left me breathless and frozen in place. When she pulled back, her eyes searched mine. Her vulnerability laid bare for the first time. For 9 years, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I've been by your side. You're the most honorable man I've ever known. You never looked at me inappropriately or made any advances, and I admired you for that. But I've been waiting for this moment, for the chance to show you that not all women are deceitful. Her words flowed with conviction, each one sinking into the silence of the room. We make a great team, Gary. I know you as well as any wife knows her husband, and you know me. Please, give me the chance to prove that we can be more. Memories of our years together surfaced, her unwavering support, her strength, her quiet patience through my darkest times. Feelings I had buried during my marriage to Caroline now felt undeniable. Michelle's voice softened. "Do you have anything to say?" Concern flickered across her face, a rare sight that made my heart tighten. I didn't need to think. I already knew. "How many?" I asked, my voice breaking the stillness. Confusion crossed her face. "How many what?" she asked. "How many children should we have?" I clarified. Her face broke into a radiant smile, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. What would you have done in Gary's situation? Do you believe Michelle's love was truly selfless, or did her feelings for Gary complicate their professional relationship? Let's talk about loyalty, betrayal, and the unexpected paths to healing.